Welcome, everyone. We appreciate all of you being here for our office hour discussion on the SPS 2026 Integrated Resource Plan. It's June 2nd. We are recording this workshop so that in case people want to listen to it afterwards, or for folks who are unable to join us, they'll be able to access the recording on the GridWorks website. I'm Margie Tatro with my colleagues Kathy Boyce and Deborah Shields from GridWorks, and we're joined by the team from Southwestern Public Service. I see we have Justin Gable, and perhaps some of his colleagues are joining as well. So let's go ahead and skip to the next slide. Our objectives today really are to respond to questions that remain in stakeholders' minds from workshop number 4. We'd like to be able to answer those here before we get ready to hear some more modeling results at the next workshop later in June. And we also are intended to help prepare stakeholders to submit any stakeholder requested model run requests by 5 p.m. Mountain Time on June 12th. So we'll come back to that and describe that process, but just want to let you know that's the next step in this stakeholder engagement process. So our plan for today is really just to hear from any of you who are here with questions that you have. We put some topics on the agenda that we heard from people at the last workshop or since the last workshop, and include questions about model run requests, questions about data or information that stakeholders are hoping to get in order to inform their requests. We can talk a bit about how the system of data on iManage is being handled, if there are questions about that. We know there are questions about carbon capture assumptions, especially in the out years of the planning period, and any other questions that you all have. Then we'll summarize and adjourn by 3 o'clock, unless we adjourn earlier if there are not further questions. So I'd like to begin by first calling on those of you who specifically requested that we hold an office hour since the last workshop. And so if any of these folks are here, I see James Hall from ExxonMobil is here. I see Chelsea Hodling from Energy Futures Group. I don't yet see Martina from Targa. But I also see Darren Zigich from the New Mexico PRC. So let me begin with those folks, Chelsea and Martina. Kara Lynch, I know, is also part of the team working with Chelsea, James Hall, and Darren. Let's let you go first with any questions. Please raise your hand if you have questions for the SPS team, and then we'll open up to anybody else who's got questions. So anybody like to pose the first one? James, yes, please go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. James Hall with ExxonMobil. I apologize. I still, after 4 years of Zoom or whatever, can't figure out where the raise your hand thing is, so I did it manually. Um, hey, so we talked about CCS and carbon intensity, and I understand. I mean, let me say a couple of things, and then let me ask a question. So, our ExxonMobil, like all kind of large load folks in the Permian Basin on the New Mexico side and the Texas side, we want reliable power, cost-effective power, and as practically as possible, low carbon power, right? We want to lower the carbon intensity, and we have our own net zero targets ourselves as a company. So we're all trying to do and achieve the same thing. But of course, the reliable and the cost piece, which has been kicked around ad nauseum, gets more and more difficult to have two of those things sort of concurrently, the closer you get to 70, 80, 90%, right? Because of the overbuild of renewables and so forth and the accreditation stuff. So I know the Energy Transition Act, so the 2019 Act, says that it's renewable up to 80%. Okay. And there's a separate workflow where I think we have to have a conversation with the state about what that means for, retail ratepayers as well as large loads. But assuming that is what it is, Zoe made a comment on the last call that the 80 to 100% obviously goes to carbon free as opposed to renewable, and that there was some ambiguity about whether CCS could, or hydrogen, I presume for that matter, could be included in that final bridge from 80 to 100%, where investments are going to be made now that cover that time frame. Does anybody from the SPS team have, anecdotal support or conversations with folks that they can share that explain why CCS or hydrogen would not be fit for that 80 to 100% zero carbon resource, recognizing that all forms of power have some level of carbon intensity through the manufacturing and installation and an operation of them.
All right, James, thank you for your question. I know that we do have Dr. Taylor Moots on who can speak a little bit to that. I don't know, Taylor, if you can speak so much to the New Mexico regulations or not, but I'll let you take the first stab at it.
Yeah, let me oh sorry, I was just trying to find my notes on the ETA language. So the challenge is that the language for the ETA just says that the electricity generation resource cannot emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that's the language. There's also a provision around methane. But in terms of this conversation, it just says that it cannot emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And so I think when you think about carbon capture, you can do carbon capture approaches that do capture 99.9%. When you do overbuilds, you can do your more traditional designs where it's 90 to 95%.
Mhm.
But technically, those do emit carbon into the atmosphere. So what we our understanding, per what Zoe said last time, is that therefore those are not eligible. Hydrogen separately, when you are combusting hydrogen or things like that, it is not producing CO2 from the electricity generation perspective. So that one is eligible.
I
I think
see.
yeah. Does that help a little bit of where we kind of
Yeah, no, it
currently
does.
understand it? Yeah.
It really does. And nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
I agree with you. It's just a plea for pragmatism, really. And I know. Obviously, everyone has to, including ExxonMobil, have to operate within the laws of the land. And so we're not trying to push for anything that would be outside of those boundaries, because of course that would be wholly inappropriate. But unless we have some dispatchable, pragmatic sort of solutions on the table longer term, as the costs start to drop down, because CCS is still reasonably expensive at the moment. It's going to get really tricky to close that gap from 80 to 100%, right? Without very, very extensive renewable overbuild. So yeah, no, I think that's good for now. And I will just continue to talk to the right folks to try and get some policy flexibility that gets us to where we all need to get to, but in a way that doesn't bankrupt everyone that's trying to invest in the state.
Yeah,
So
and
I appreciate
Justin,
that.
I don't know if we want to talk about kind of our modeling approach for in this world. I think we, correct me if I'm wrong, we are considering modeling carbon capture um, to see how it does impact the cost portfolio per what you were talking about. So if that's something that would be valuable from your all's perspective, I think we'd love to hear that. But that was something that we did put forth as a potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be nice to see CCS thrown into the mix towards the back end of your time period. My only request would be, to sit down with, the practitioners that have actually done that. And of course, ExxonMobil have injected more CO2 into the ground than any other company in the world. So we have a pretty good understanding of what's possible and some of the challenges that lie ahead as well. But we would love to offer our knowledge and what's worked and what hasn't worked and what we sort of see the costs and the technology improvements being and what those timeframes might look like. So we'd love to have that conversation with you if you had time to talk to us about that.
Thanks, James. I see Austin. I see your hand up.
Yeah,
I just go ahead, Austin. If you want to.
either way, Justin, how about you say what you're going to say and then I'll chime in.
Well, I just want to reorient people on the model. So when we're developing the model, it's always going to be a least cost optimization. So when you provide options that are least cost to get megawatt hours in the system, you're going to see them all take those selections. So, we have some scenarios that are developed to meet RPS 45, right? And the way we're seeing these policies written, carbon capture is not a thing that will get us to RPS 45. It's still a carbon emitting resource. And so if we're trying to do a least cost optimization and our target is RPS through 2045, so carbon zero, the model is not going to select on a least cost solution a carbon capture. Like it's a policy discussion. It's not a modeling discussion at this point. Now, if you do a model, like there's definitely, when we have scenarios that we've been talking about where we do force ends of the model. In fact, in the 23 IRP, we had a force into the nuclear resources at Harrington. Something we're probably going to see in this time. We're currently spending them all on the emerging tech stuff. We've just probably within a couple of hours now, we've just finished developing all of our emerging tech generic resources, and we're going to be spinning up the model just to see what natively gets selected. My assumption is that we're not going to see something like nuclear get selected, so we're going to force it in. Now, we can force in carbon capture, and we can get a cost delta on that. But is it going to be a cost delta that gets you to RPS 45? No. So that's just one thing that I just like to mention. Go ahead, Austin. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, and so first I was going to ask hopefully an easy question. Taylor, could you tell me that rule you're reading from on the definition of non-carbon emitting?
Like what section?
Yeah.
It is admittedly copied into a PowerPoint, so bear with me, but I'm pretty sure
Oh,
it's there's ET language and then I have it as K.
I'll put it in
Okay.
the chat, Austin. This is
Yeah,
Sam.
thank
Yeah.
you. Sorry.
I
My
could
notes are
find that.
not
I was
as
just hoping to shortcut that a little bit.
legalese.
Okay. And then I guess, Justin, following up on what you said, do you guys do you ever run models to find a portfolio assuming there was no policy guidance at all? Just what's the lowest cost solution to keep our system running?
Yes, we do that. That's what we
Okay.
consider our base scenario.
So that's what I thought. So that might select a carbon sequestration, right?
No, it would never select quick carbon sequestration if given if you have a CT, let's just isolate to a CT. If you have a CT and you have a CT that says carbon sequestration, it's only an added cost with no additional megawatt hours.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it needs state policy or strong stakeholder drivers, right, in order for you to consider it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the IRP rule, least cost portfolio, we can provide these different scenarios to provide visibility of what the cost deltas here are. But ultimately, when you're using a least cost optimization and you're adding no additional value but only cost, it's never going to make that decision.
No, that's helpful. That's all I needed out of this conversation. That's got me thinking about what my next steps need to be. So thank you.
But it going back to the rule discussion, it does seem like if there was, the political will, it would be a pretty easy fix to change the rule of non-carbon emitting to include something that, sequesters 99.9% of carbon or something like that.
I think it says zero carbon and then it's qualified. So
Yeah, I mean the methane, sorry to interrupt, but the fact that, all that reduces methane emitted into the atmosphere, to no less than 1/10 of a ton is an interesting calculation, and I don't know how that compares. So that's something for us to follow up on.
Great. And Austin, Sam has put into the chat the sections from the New Mexico Energy Transition Act
I see that, yeah.
refer to this. So that's where that comes from. Thank you, Sam. Deb, feel free to take down our slides in case the SPS folks would like to share any information on slides and whatnot. But let's continue to offer opportunities for questions. I see that Kara Lynch and Chelsea are here. Wanted to ask you if you have any questions. I don't think we've seen any requests from you for additional data yet, but Chelsea, please go ahead.
Thanks. This is Chelsea with Time at Energy Futures Group. I apologize, I've been delayed on the data requests, working on some other deadlines for testimony in other cases. So I'm in the process of getting started on reviewing the Encompass files that have been provided. So I will likely have questions and as I dig into those. But I think the one question that I had as it relates to data request, I spent time last week catching up on all the recordings that I missed, reading through all the materials that have been provided. Unless I'm just like overlooking where information might have been provided, I think it's still unclear to me what underpins some of the changes to the load forecast. And I was wondering if it would be possible to provide additional detail on the load forecast as it relates to what's happening with the large loads. So, for example, I understand my understanding of the breakdown of the load forecast as it relates to large loads is that you have customers that are committed, they're under service agreements, they're in the forecast, and then you have the probabilistic analysis that has developed two assumptions for the rest of the planning period about what that large load might be. And I think in terms of stakeholders thinking about scenario requests and if they want to make change to load forecast, it's not clear to me exactly what might be happening in the low load forecast. For example, like, are you only modeling customers that have made commitments in that low load forecast? Like, are you changing something in the probabilistic model? So I guess from a data perspective, like, is there any way that you can provide like any type of supporting analyses, whether it's the probabilistic model or additional explanation about how you might be defining the probabilities, like who's going into the probabilistic model, and any assumptions that are going into the alternative load forecast that you've already identified? I think that would be helpful for me to better understand, like, if there's a scenario request that we would want to make around a different load forecast.
Thanks, Chelsea. So I don't believe that we have our load forecasting team on today. So I don't know that we have the right folks to really give you the details on what you're wanting in those the inputs there. I do think that if you have like a request that you want, we can definitely send us an email. I'm assuming it can go through GoodWorks. We can get you either some confidential files that you might be curious about understanding, or maybe some more detailed descriptions. But I don't know that we have the right folks on the call to be able to answer the question today.
So Justin, I am on.
I see John.
Okay, John.
Yeah.
I didn't see you.
Certainly didn't have any time to prepare for this question, so I'm not going to be able to give a super in-depth answer. So I echo what Justin mentioned about sending a request, and we'll figure out how to provide more information. The one detail that I can provide is that low forecast does not include any probabilistic load. So all of the load growth there is tied to specific requests. But we can provide kind of breakouts and those kinds of things in more detail at a future date.
Okay, thank you. I'll put together some requests and send them over on this topic.
Just one additional thing. I don't know if this gets at your question specifically, Chelsea, but I just want to remind folks that we are expecting into 2 specific runs on data centers. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily the large load that you're talking about. I mean, there's lots of different types of large loads, but just to remind folks that what we are planning on doing is taking our base plan and logging those resources and the load that's associated with the base plan, and then incrementally adding a data center that looks like a 1 gigawatt data center, and then not re-optimizing, but allowing the model to incrementally select new resources to service just that data center load. And the 2 different scenarios are going to be, one, a scenario representing the least cost to solution that, so it would allow thermal generation or any kind of generation that's on the system, or an ETA compliant portfolio. So you'll be able to get the cost delta on at least 1 gigawatt of load coming on incrementally to the system, to understand what the delta is between the types of resources that would be servicing it. I don't know if that's helpful, but I just want to remind folks about it. James?
Yeah, so on that, Jared or yourself mentioned that you were going to do that for a data center. I may have misheard. I thought you were going to immediately assign 100% renewable power for that 1 gigawatt new data center as a sort of standalone entity. But what you're saying is that's incorrect, and you're going to just ramp up the renewable percentage consistent with the Energy Transition Act. Is that right?
We may be talking past each other. So in the scenario where we're assuming that you cannot service the new data center, with non-carbon emitting resources, you would allow the model to, like everything that's on the system today, we would just lock all that, and it would incrementally select new resources, and we would exclude any carbon emitting resources. So it would potentially have to solution both renewables, for the energy, and potentially batteries or some other type of technologies to also support the capacity associated with it. So maybe we're talking past each other, but I still think that like the model is making the selection of what resources are available. The only thing that we're changing between the two change cases is allowing thermal or carbon emitting resources or not
I
to
see. So I'm right then. So I did interpret that correctly. So you're not, it's not least cost versus compliance with the renewable portfolio standard. It's least cost versus 100% renewable from the get-go with these new resources.
No, it's least costs altogether, and then least cost that's ETA compliant.
Yes, versus 100% renewable.
Well, we're not doing 100% renewable, just we're not forcing the model to say 100% renewable for the data center.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And so just to translate the terminology, Justin, these are two of the sensitivities in the modeling tree, the data center sensitivities that the team had described in their modeling tree. So if you're trying to refer to which case is this that he's describing, it's the data centers sensitivities on the modeling tree.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Chelsea.
For this sensitivity, which year would you assume that the load materializes?
Yeah, I'll have to go back and check exactly, but I think what we determined on that was a one. Sorry, let me just make this note. 1 gigawatt data center ramping over 5 years. And I have to, don't hold me to it, but I think that we have it set as 2033 set to start.
I don't think it's over 5 years though. Let's have that as a follow-up to provide the exact ramp of that data center.
Okay. Sorry about that, John.
Okay. Would that time frame overlap with any of the emerging tech resources that you're allowing in the emerging tech scenario? Because my understanding is that those emerging techs are only an emerging tech scenario, right? So those, if you have any technology that can be selected in 2033, that would not be available in the data center case.
Well, the way that we're looking at the data center case is, I don't know that it necessarily matters what base portfolio you're looking at, whether it has emerging tech in it or not. What my anticipation is that it's going to be incremental to whatever is currently on the system. So, or not on the system, but what is currently in the model for that scenario over that time period. So if the model is selecting new resources to service just that data center and emerging tech is available, it could still select emerging tech.
Okay, yeah, that's just what I was trying to understand, because like I understand like the incremental change, but I'm just wondering if you don't have those incremental tech options in the non-carbon emitting resources, like likely you're getting solar, wind, and storage. But I was wondering, like an emerging tech, like if something like geothermal was available on the time frame when the data center is materializing, like I just don't know if you'd get a different result as to what non-carbon emitting resources get selected.
Yeah, I take your point. Like it does,
Yep.
like the timing does matter. We'll have to go back and review the exact timing on when we're expecting these resources to be available and when they would be, or when the data center would be coming online.
Okay. Can I ask one more question on the emerging tech?
Yes, ma'am.
Um, I like I said earlier, I looked through all the materials. I could not find a slide that referenced any cost or availability assumptions for the modeling perspective. I don't know if I missed it in everything that I looked at, but if that hasn't been provided, is that something that could be shared with stakeholders? Because I think that would also help inform any modifications we might want to suggest.
Yes. Yeah, we did provide some of that. I don't know if we had all of the emerging tech assumptions necessarily available, but yes, if you'd like to request that, please
Okay.
let us know, and we can provide you some cost assumptions for any specific tech you're asking for.
Okay. Thank you.
Chelsea, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in. This is Kathy Boyce. Are you asking for the generic cost assumptions for each of the technology types or for emerging technology specifically?
So I believe I can identify the generic resources from the Encompass modeling files that have been already provided, but I don't believe those would include any of the emerging tech. And when I looked at all the previous PowerPoint slides, like I couldn't find anything for the emerging tech.
Ah,
So that's what I think might be missing, unless I know I looked through a lot of materials, so like I'm not discounting the chance that I missed something. So I just was saying like I don't think there's been something shared. And so if I am right, if we could get the emerging tech assumptions like that would be helpful to just inform like if we wanted to make a modification for the scenarios that are due on the 12th.
Got it.
yeah,
Thank you.
we definitely yeah, I don't believe that we have provided those. So if yeah, if you could put that request in, we can get that information over to you.
Thanks.
Other questions? I see Darren Zigich from the PRC. I know you were interested in this office hours. Or anything, Darren, that you wanted to ask at this point? It's possible he had to jump off. I don't see him now currently logged on. So again, open up to anybody who has a question at this point.
Margie, I'll jump in if folks are thinking through. I'm going to drop in the chat here the forms for data access on iManage. And well, I see Chelsea, you have a hand, so maybe we'll go to you. But I also wonder if our SPS team might just offer a little bit of what is available on iManage, recognizing some of it's confidential, but just to kind of give people a sense of what's available. And for those of you looking for data information, this is maybe where you catalog what else do you need?
Do you want me to wait for Chelsea, or do you want me to go and answer?
Why don't you go ahead and answer? Margie, I don't mean to step in over you, but why don't you answer quick, Justin, and then we'll go to Chelsea.
Okay. So currently on the iManage system right now, we have all the inputs and outputs that were a part of the base case scenarios that we provided. I think it was in number 4 workshop. So those would not include emerging tech. So Chelsea's right on that. We can definitely provide those though. We did just finish developing the emerging tech resources, generic resources though. So what you'll be getting is pretty recent development. So sorry about that, Chelsea. We haven't provided that before now. That's it.
Thank you,
Kathy.
Justin. Yep, thank you. Okay, Margie, back to you.
No, thank you. Chelsea, please go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask for clarification. I know the market scenarios were a big topic at our last IRP meeting. I guess I was wondering what the future of that might be. Are you expecting, like, are you still open to feedback on that? Or would you rather see that as a scenario request from stakeholders? Like, is it too far along in the process to suggest a different approach for the market scenarios, or are we in the time frame now where that has to come as a stakeholder scenario request?
Thank you for the question. it was actually what I was really hoping to focus on today. However, I was reviewing the modeling yesterday evening, and we found some errors in the modeling, so we can't provide those results today. But we do. So what we took your feedback though, and so we have two RTO scenarios. One is the one we originally were talking about, where we are just islanding and it's just an energy look. And then the other one was an islanded look. And in addition to that, because we wouldn't be if we're not following SPP rules, we wouldn't assume participation in the SPP market. We also took off the winter PRM and the associated winter ELCC accreditations. So the model is solving for just the summer capacity need in an islanded world for the production costing as well. Directionally, what we saw is, there was I'll speak off the cuff, like with the assumption that the modeling did have errors and we are respinning it. But directionally, what we saw was it did increase renewables and batteries on the system to only target the summer. However, what we saw in the production cost runs was a significant increase in unserved energy. So we had these three different cases, and we had our base case, which assumes market participation and the winter LCCs and PRM requirements. When we take that and we just island it, we saw additional unserved energy, substantial amount of unserved energy from not being a participant in the market. And then we saw an even larger uptick with the change in capacity build out that allowed more renewables, more batteries on the system, but no market participation. So there are impacts to those things. We are respinning to get better numbers, but what we saw with the high unserved energy is ultimately that's not a portfolio we can bring forward with the amount of unserved energy in it. So we would have to reiterate through that to get a portfolio that is both capacity and energy adequate through the entire planning horizon. So every indication at this moment is that, yes, it does change resource mix, but it looks like the resource mix that it's building currently is not sufficient enough to root out unserved energy.
Yeah, thanks for that update. I have been thinking about this scenario a lot since the last IRP meeting and struggling with anything to suggest. It's definitely helpful to understand those results on a summer basis. Where I was thinking, based on the feedback, I believe what was represented was that if you had looked at your own system, like you do expect that you would have the winter concern, that you don't think you're out of step with the risks that have been identified, or the risk periods that have been identified by SPP. So I guess where I was leaning towards was if you still needed that winter requirement, but it's not to the level that SPP has determined. I reviewed their LOE studies, and it seems like Winter Storm Uri is having a major influence. Like when all of your LOE is held in like 90+% of all of your weather years, like that's a really extreme result. And so I guess I was coming back to the question of like, if your resources perform differently than SPP during Winter Storm Uri, is there more a case for you to be looking at a lower reserve margin requirement in the winter than what you're currently under with SPP? So if you weren't a part of SPP, but you did your own analysis, like what I think you're doing for the 2028 requirement, you might come up with a summer and a winter planning reserve margin for your system. Like even if you weren't a part of SPP, that's what a lot of the Southeastern utilities find that aren't in RTOs, like, and then they find that their winter reserve margin is the binding, like that's what they plan for in their expansion models. So I was kind of wondering if that's the realm that we might need to be into, but then there's a question of like, what do you actually model, right? Like if you don't go with SPP, like how much lower do you make it? And then that kind of becomes a subjective question because we don't have a good way to get at that. And so I thought I heard at the last meeting that SPS might have proposed a lower reserve margin to SPP. And I was wondering if you'd be able to share what that was, if it would be large enough to make a difference in the modeling, to see if it drives different expansion results. Like that might be one pathway to consider. Or if there is a number we might be comfortable testing, understanding that there's some questions around that, but saying like, what if the reserve margin is lower? Like, what does that do to our system? Like, do we see a substantial difference in the capacity expansion plan? And does that address the EUV that happens if we just look at a summer requirement? And so I'm still struggling with like how much subjectiveness has to come into this because we don't have data really to calculate at this point. But that's kind of where I've been heading on this like scenario market question. But as probably you can tell from what I just said, I'm still struggling with like how to test this. But that's kind of where I was thinking might be a potentially useful run just to see what that impact is. Like, are we truly getting a significant difference in build out? And because I think you'll get a better picture of this when you do your analysis for the 2028 requirement. But if we wanted to get like a peek into where you might end up when you do that analysis, like that might be a scenario design that could get at that.
So there's a couple of things. I may not be able to hit every point that you made. There was a couple of things that I think I heard that I think we probably should address. So step in. It's like we have a little bit of a dialogue here just so that I don't miss anything. On the SPP, when we talked about the idea that we had actually proposed a lower PRM. So originally, when that analysis was being done to identify the winter PRM requirement of 36%, originally that number was actually in the low 40s, and that was driven heavily by Winter Storm Uri. There had been some calculation changes that ultimately helped drive it down a little bit, but ultimately SPS had and this is a little bit before my time, so I can't necessarily speak to the data that supported this, but originally SPS supported a 33% PRM requirement. Ultimately, what was approved through the RSC was 36%. So originally 40 something, we suggested 33, it got to 36. I don't have the data to support why we said 33% at this moment. I would say that I do believe that the winter is a risk for us. I think that the current modeling that we have, even though I just mentioned it had errors, it's directionally saying the same thing, is that yes, you build for the summer and you can get a different resource mix. Thing just to keep in mind, just intuitively, summer really accredits solar much better than it does than the winter does, right? So you're going to see the model favor a resource like solar. But what we saw even in this scenario where we don't have a winter PRM and it's just building for the summer, is thermal generation coming in the portfolio? Substantial amount of thermal generation, partly because we have a significant amount of replacements that need to happen through 2047 to move away from our gas thermal generation and also our retiring CCs that are currently on the system. So the model is still making a selection of all of these different resource types. Now it just changes different percentages, or it changes the ratio of those resource selections. But the current modeling is suggesting that when you remove the PRM, it really drives up the EUE. So you would have to reiterate or iterate through that until you could root out the EUE. And the nameplate additions on this scenario for the winter PRM being gone were higher, but the accredited capacity was basically lower because it was just targeting meeting that summer PRM. But what we're saying is that EUE indicates that you need more resources. So that this scenario, although it's flawed and will provide some more updated information, means that you would end up needing to build more nameplate generation, right? So we know that no matter what, the model is indicating thermal generation needs to be continued through the planning horizon, that there is a potential for more wind and solar and battery utilization if you were to lower the winter PRM. But ultimately, the current portfolios that we're having that are bigger than the portfolios in our base scenario are not enough to support the system if you do not have the winter PRM. So the winter PRM is protective. it's helping the system build enough resources to be energy adequate through all hours of the year. That was a lot, Chelsea. So like, is there anything I missed on that?
No, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I think I'm just not effectively communicating. So I think it's on me. What I was just trying to say is like, if we're just trying to represent what that future might be like if you were not a part of SPP and you believe that your system has a similar risk profile, would it be worthwhile to look at a run that does have both the summer and the winter in force, but you look at a different number for the winter? And to me, this isn't the goal of like trying to identify how much. I'm not going in this with a predetermined outcome of what the model is going to say. So I'm not trying to trade off resource technologies here. I'm just saying like that run could give you a sense of like if we weren't part of SPP and we had a lower winter reserve margin, like what happens to our expansion plan? Maybe you have a different resource mix. Like maybe you do shift away from resources that you're already seeing in the modeling you've done, but like also just to get a sense of the magnitude. And I guess the other benefit might be that hopefully you wouldn't have the EUE that you're seeing by just doing the summer only runs. But where I was struggling is like, how do we get, if you did do that kind of scenario, like how do we get to that winter number? Do you assume the winter is the same as the summer as just kind of throwing something out there? But otherwise, I don't have a good number to suggest that you use. And that's what I'm struggling with is like, I would like to have something rooted in an analysis to suggest, and I just don't. But like that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like if when we fast forward to 2028 and you have done your cost benefit analysis, like if you are doing like if you weren't part of SPP, ultimately you would have to do some kind of analysis using a model like Servum or E3, right? So E3's model to determine your planning reserve margin. And if we say if that is what you were doing and you did determine that you needed a summer and a winter PRM, like if that's the world we're in, like that's kind of where I'm headed, is like not saying that, like to try to acknowledge that you will have those risks and it would hopefully address the EUE concerns that you're already seeing. And so that's kind of like where I was thinking the scenario might be, but like caveat that I'm struggling with like how do you determine that winter number? And it possibly could just be the situation that you try something that you think is significant enough to drive a different result, and then we have a data point, right? Like we have a data point on what that does to the resource mix or does not do the resource mix. Maybe you'll get a similar build ratio.
Yeah, I hear you. And thanks for that clarifying information. I would say that I also struggle with what the number is because it's not just a number of the PRM, because we have both performance-based accreditation on thermals and ELCC for the renewables right now. And, the performance-based accreditation by itself, like do we just strip out performance-based accreditation and then do we do some kind of ELCC? And we don't have ELCC for our thermal resources right now. I agree with you. Like it needs that additional analysis. It needs, both a PRM accreditation or sorry, a PRM value. It needs ELCC runs specifically for the system for the kind of analysis that you're really after. And I think that we are anticipating doing that type of work for the 28 requirement. I just think that like for our IRP today, we are required to model the rules and requirements that we have today. And we're trying to provide, some kind of like data point like you're asking for with like removing the winter PRM. But I don't know that just, establishing a PRM requirement and then if we don't like that PRM requirement, do we start adjusting ELCC values for the different resources? I'm struggling with all of the different data points that would have to be touched to kind of get at the analysis you're talking about. I just don't think that it's possible with the data we have today. But I think it's very, very apparent that those are the types of things that we are considering for the 28 requirement. I'm sorry, I'm not providing a satisfying answer.
I'm not providing satisfying feedback. So I guess I just, the way the scenario was framed as an islanded approach, it just leads you to conclude things, and that's partly my fault, about how it might be represented. So I don't know if we need to possibly reconsider like how it's framed as a scenario. Understanding that it is rooted in like these limitations of not having the analyses that would be needed, but you'll have for the 2028 requirement to really kind of get at this question of what the impacts are.
Yeah, Chelsea, I am kind of curious though. Like, I apologize. We're just kind of riffing now. If everybody else, if we need to stop, let me know. But um, one of the things that I'm kind of thinking about here is like we have a scenario right here that has no winter PRM. It has EUE. I mean, would it be amendable to just iterating off and continuing to increase the summer PRM until we can root out EUE? So just iteratively, we run a capacity expansion, we get a production cost run, it's got EUE. We bump up the summer PRM 2%, and that's the only number we end up changing. And then we rerun the production cost run, see if we can get a change to the EUE. And we just keep ramping up the PRM for the summer. That would allow us to isolate the amount of inputs. We could keep the ELCC accreditations alone, and we could just keep working with that summer PRM that would hopefully end up driving some kind of resource mix. Now, granted, that still is not taking into account the seasonal impact of resource operations, but what do you think about that?
Do you have a general sense of where the largest amounts of EUV are happening? Like,
Winter.
Are they every month, or is it specific to a season?
It's specific to winter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
At
least in the modeling runs that we had errors in, so hold that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, no, totally understand that. I think to me I understand why you do not prefer the suggestion that I had about potentially putting in a winter requirement, but I think it might be a question of like which way might require less iteration, because you could be in an endless loop of iterating on the summer, right? If it is a winter. So even if you just put in like a small planning reserve margin for the winter, understanding that there's issues with not capturing potentially the right accreditation for your resources, like you pointed out earlier. Even if you did one run that said, okay, we'll just impose that's something that's similar to our summer PRM, and just see what happens if the EU is there or not there. That might give you a general sense of can we address the EUE through that approach. I don't have a good sense of how many iterations you might need going the other way. I think it's definitely an approach you can take. I just don't know how many runs you're going to need.
Well, I think it runs the risk of a resource mix that's summer tuned. That's part of my concern. But Chelsea, I think this has been a good conversation. I think that we can take it back, digest a little bit, see if there's something we can figure out here. But I appreciate the comments.
Yeah, let me suggest, I think it's good conversation. Let me suggest, Chelsea, as you think about what do you hope to learn out of this additional or modified run would be really useful, and that's maybe what can go into your modeling request form that gets turned in by the 12th. And then we'll have additional conversation between then and during the workshop that's being planned here for later in June to really finalize and parameterize the modeling runs from stakeholders, because there may be people in addition to yourself that are interested in this topic. And so we'll be able to have a collaborative discussion based on the sort of the questions that people want to explore in modeling. So certainly not the end of this conversation. I think it's a good start. Let me just offer before I turn to James for his question that if perhaps a modeling scenario isn't feasible or doesn't make sense in this IRP sequence, there's always an opportunity for input for the action plan that SPS would engage some level of, conversation with people as they're doing their 2028 study and analysis. So think about action plan, even if it's not something that can happen right now in this IRP. I get the sense that SPS is really valuing the input that people have on this topic and are thinking through it themselves as they get ready to do that study for 2028. So don't feel like we have to shoehorn something in right now if it looks like it's more appropriate when additional studies are going to be done. So just wanted to offer that. James, please go ahead with your
Yeah,
question.
just a quick one, and this is my last one for today. And Justin, you're sort of unflappable in your responses, so I don't mind asking this. How does this work with so I think about this is purely energy, right? This is not transmission related in the modeling. Because I look at like the $1.1 trillion of transmission and the 765 infrastructure backbones that are being built out all over the US. Because I have New Mexico, but I have other states as well. And obviously, like the cost of some of these resources is going to be a function of where they're built and where they're located, right? In terms of, transmission upgrades and other things that they may or may not require. Remind me, this is just when you do your modeling, you don't build transmission costs into this at all. Is that right? There's no sort of transmission or geographical distinguishing about location, not because of the policy, but just because of the physical ability to tie into the backbone of everything that's being built out.
Yes, we actually do have some inclusions of transmission in the system, and it's not like a fully nodal analysis. We're not doing that level, but what we do have is a zonal representation of the transmission system, and we do have transmission network upgrade adders in the model. So the way the topology generally looks is three load area bubbles. We have the North Panhandle, the Southern Plains, and then what we call Southeast New Mexico. Um, so those three load area bubbles have transmission constraints between the two that are represented in the model. And then we also have the SPP market with a transmission constraint to it as well. So there is transmission topology on there. And then for, capturing network upgrade cost. Now this is a big like question mark here because, people that are following the DICES, the 24 DICES numbers for the phase one have come back. They're extraordinary in some cases. And so, what we have currently in the model is an expectation of $125 per kW transmission adder. However, we also have a number of retirements and replacements across the system that need to happen. And we've tried to do is that at locations where there is retirements, we
Right.
try to identify what we call locational specific generics. So the model can't take advantage of like selecting a generic resource at an existing location and avoid a network upgrade cost addition.
Right.
So now we could debate the level of 125. Is that enough? It's not, but we do have the model being able to get pushed one way or the other to allow the avoidance of TNUs.
Yeah. No, that makes
Um,
perfect sense. But what else can you really do other than just say, of course, it's better to replace an aging resource where it's located for a whole bunch of reasons, and then B, come up with your best guess of what the transmission cost would be if it's located elsewhere. So that's helpful for me to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, the only other thing that I'd just add is that in general, what we do is don't add transmission adders to batteries with the assumption, and this is probably just a generous assumption, is that batteries don't have a TNU because they're likely to be co-located. And
Yeah.
is that accurate always? No, but I don't think it's a bad expectation,
Well, it
so.
makes them a little more cost effective if they do that. So that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you, James. I want to reserve this last few minutes for a participant that had also suggested we do this office hour. I think Darren may be back on from Darren Zigich from the PRC. Darren, is there anything you wanted to ask in this office hour before we close?
No, I'm glad we had this good discussion. It seems like this was a worthwhile endeavor. So that was really more my ask was it seemed like we had some loose ends, and it seemed like another hour would be well used, and it seems like that came to fruition. I guess my only question, are all of the files confidential? Is there any non-contra confidential files?
So what we currently have is just the inputs and outputs of the model as a whole. So those are all confidential because you just can't really break up. If there's something specific that you would like, please request it. And if it's confidential, we can let you know, and you can either sign the confidentiality agreement, or if it's non-confidential, we can just provide it.
Well,
But
like Chelsea was mentioning the cost of each resource, general cost information like that, I mean, that's pretty generic.
Mhm.
It seems like that would have been, um, again, I'm just, we've got two of these running in parallel, and one company has a lot of generic information that's not confidential, and then they have other files that are. So that was
So yeah, Darren, what we're asking is that if there is information like that you all would like to see, please send an email to Linda Hudgens and Deborah Shields, and then we'll work with SPS to make sure those requests are responded to. We're hoping to get that. We haven't set a deadline for that data request, but just remember that we're trying to close out the conversation about stakeholder requested runs when we have our next workshop um, later in this month. So just if you have ideas of data that you think you'd like to see generically, please, or that's public access, either way, just send us a list of what you're looking for, and we'll make sure that it becomes available to everyone. Appreciate that you saying that, Darren. Chelsea, do you have another question that's maybe quick?
I think so. Sorry. uh, um, can stakeholders only submit one scenario, or is it possible to like rank choice them, and then if not enough stakeholders submit scenarios, like there might be consideration for more than one request?
Well, so our process at this point, Chelsea, is to put in any idea that you think is an interesting idea for you. And we haven't limited people to the number of ideas they can put in. What we are going to do when we meet in June, though, is have a discussion amongst the stakeholders. Maybe there's one idea that 5 different stakeholders are keenly interested in, and we need to collaboratively define the parameters for that. We're going to wait and see how that process goes. So currently there's not a limit on number of runs that can be submitted, but do recognize that at the end of the workshop next in June, later this month, we will narrow them down to a reasonable number that SPS will be able to run in a timely fashion. Our experience is that that's somewhere in the range of maybe a total from 6 to 10 kind of additional runs. But there is not a firm number on that, and there's not a firm number on the number of ideas that any stakeholder can turn in at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. Let me turn to you, Justin, before we close and give the next steps. Is there anything else, Justin, you or the team from SPS wanted to add before we close?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to meet with us and talk about this. It's pretty cool to see this many people interested in, wanting to see what we do all the time with our day. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
As Justin told us when we started this process, he says, I love talking about this stuff, and he definitely does. It shows his passion and his expertise certainly come across. And Justin, we appreciate your energy and your engagement in this. Thank you and your whole team.
Thank you.
Let me just summarize our next steps. As we mentioned, this recording will be posted on the GridWorks website. Please send the modeling data request forms that Kathy put into the chat are available under workshop 3 on the GridWorks site. There's also the modeling request form that's available on the GridWorks website under workshop number 4 materials. Please turn that in by June 12th at 5 p.m. What that does is it gives us and the SPS team a chance to look at those, consider those, and frame the conversations during the June 23rd, 24th workshop to reflect the modeling run interests from the stakeholders. So we're going to do a little homework in advance of the workshop to take those ideas, maybe identify ones that are synergistic or could be collaborative, and bring those conversations together. So that's really the purpose of getting your ideas in early so that we can bring closure to the conversation at our next workshop on June 23rd and 24th. That will be hosted in Hobbs, New Mexico at the Xcel Energy SPS Service Center in Hobbs. There will also be a Zoom link available. We are again strongly encouraging people, especially those who have specific modeling interests, to attend in person if at all possible. The conversations and discussion is always better in person and is fuller and richer, and we can encourage that, although we understand that may be not possible for everyone. So there will be a Zoom link available. Our focus on that during that workshop will be to understand all the modeling results to date that SPS will be able to share and give us a sense of the kinds of things they're learning from those runs, and then agree importantly on the parameters of the stakeholder requested runs so that that work can be done between June and July. So with that, again, please send any data information requests to Deborah Shields and Linda Hudgens at the email addresses here. And you can always find this material and these contacts on the GridWorks website. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for participating in this office hour. And we look forward to seeing all of you and others in Hobbs on June 23rd. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.